Hello there. This is another how-to. This one will be how to swarm host. And I do want to say ahead of time that I am not going to go over any straight builds, but I do want to go over the mindsets, when to use them, and maybe a little bit of theory crafting as well. In this game, I just got finished watching the replay and all that, and then I took a few notes and everything. We see around the 12-minute mark, the Protoss has taken some damage from roach play and such in the early minutes of the game, but now the Protoss is making an all-in attempt with the Immortals and a lot of gateway units. He is going to get this third, and our Zerg player was made a few Mutalisks, and those are going to go around the side into the Protoss' base momentarily. But what we don't usually see is the Swarm Host in the natural, and now the thing is that when Protoss engages in a Zerg base and he has a pylon there, he can constantly reinforce. Well, what can Swarm Hosts do? They can constantly reinforce for free. They do a lot of damage and they survive quite long, especially if the Protoss is just going to push in here from this third base location and try to win the game. He's going to have to push through spines and a few Swarm Hosts there, and they will constantly reinforce while the Zerg is building up other units. And this gives Zerg time. This makes the Protoss have to fall back. So let's just look at how this early part plays out, and then we'll go into the later portions of the game. Now, a lot of people see Swarm Host as only the siege unit, but they can be used quite effectively in this sort of protective area right here. He has the observer, so he can see the Swarm Host if he gets close enough, but at the same time, it doesn't matter. He has to get through all these spores. The queens are here as well, and the overseer allows the observer to be sniped right here in just a moment, actually. And with these locusts, they are going to tear apart the front line of zealots. And with the queens, they are able to keep the spine crawlers alive. Now, when those are both combined, the stalkers do not want to be taking those spine crawler hits. So the Protoss player does have to fall back at the end. And now this leaves him a little bit behind. He has been taking some harass in his main base. I'm not sure why my computer's being a little bit slower right now. Hopefully that fixes itself. Sorry though. But behind all this, we see the +1 upgrade for the Zerg on those ranged unit. That shows that he could either go into that Roach Hydra tech, or he could stay on the Swarm Host, because they do stay out with upgrades, which is amazing. And now getting the Hive as well, he's just going to be able to tech up behind this. He is only on 2 base. He did have to sacrifice his third, but at the same time, when a Protoss all-in doesn't kill the Zerg, the Protoss is also behind in terms of tech, upgrades, and such like that. Now, I believe the Protoss already got, yes, he did get his +1, but he doesn't have a council on the field. He doesn't have any further attack. He's trying to get Stargates out, but when you have such a high queen count already, that's going to be hard to play any Phoenix type play, and even into Void Rays, the Zerg will have plenty of time to react. Now let's fast forward just a little bit, and we see the Zerg getting his upgrades for the Locust, getting that +2 attack as well on his ranged units. He's also keeping up his queen count, and this just allows him to have a nice safe position, because when you have Swarm Hosts, there's 2 things you have to remember. One, they are a Zerg unit, and yes, of course, that's blatantly obvious, but at the same point, every Zerg unit needs to be constantly in use, unless you have Ultralist or something. But Lings need to be getting map control, Mutas need to be going in and out of your opponent's base, and Swarm Hosts, they need to constantly be being used, not just sending them out to random points, but being used around the map, used for defensive purposes, and such like that. And now, while they do have a few weaknesses, like they are very immobile, if you are sieging your opponent's base and they come to drop on you, you're going to be in a really tight spot unless you've prepared for that otherwise. But when you have all these queens here, for Mr. Root Fizzy is our Zerg player right here, or Fitzy, then you can defend against these early aggression moves very easily. You can defend against the airplay as well, and the Phoenixes are coming out because he saw the Mutalist, but he's going to be sad to see that no more Mutalists are on the way, so the Phoenixes aren't going to be too very effective. And the Zerg player has a nice composition here. He can fake out with the Mutalist, he can defend with the Queens and Swarm Hosts, and eventually he can mass one or the other. He also can easily tech up behind this, because while the Protoss army can defeat a few waves of Locust, they cannot constantly do it. And that's the power of Locust. They constantly come out. So yes, the Protoss player can take engagements like this, where they do poke in and out and they do cancel this 4th base for the Zerg, but it doesn't really matter, because the Swarm Hosts are so cost effective if you set set them up correctly. And that's why a lot of players, we see them used more and more. So that's why I wanted to make this video, just because you see it more. And now we see the +2 attack on the way. We see more Swarm Host on the way as well. And there is a bit of a lull in the action right here as the Zerg player tets up, as the Protoss player tets up. He does get a fleet beacon and stuff. He's planning on going straight air at this point, I believe. And he does get Void Rays and Phoenixes out later, as well as some air upgrades, I do believe. Either way, though, the Zerg player, what's cool is that his early Queen defense, well, that's not going to carry out into the late game. With the ranged attack upgrades, that also benefits the Queens, and that makes them that much more stronger. The armor upgrades aren't that important because the Queens can tank for so long, and with Transfuse, it doesn't matter as much. And when it comes down to the Locust pushing, which is the main part of this this kind of a strategy, then you don't really need to worry about them surviving because they're free. They're going to keep coming until the Swarm Hosts themselves are killed. Slow this down a little bit as we see Phoenix is coming in here and such, and they will do possibly a little bit of damage. I didn't even see this part when I first watched the replay by myself. Do kill one Queen. They see the Swarm Host, but now Ultralisk are on the field. He's been able to tech up, not because he held an early push. Yes, that's very helpful, but because of what he held it off with. Swarm Host cannot be engaged on unless you have that AoE. Something the Protoss is doing incorrectly is he doesn't have enough AoE damage to deal with Swarm Host, even though he has seen them on the field. And he has seen quite a few of them, actually. Now, what I do like about the Swarm Host over here is that they are constantly taking this tower and making sure that nothing is coming from this left side. On the right side, though, we have creep, we have more creep, we have queens and all that. Creep spread is so important when you are going for Swarm Host because it allows them to move much faster. They are much safer because they get that extra movement speed, and Locust can go so far away from the Swarm Host before dying off that it makes them even more effective. And you see here, he's not even getting armor upgrades. He's getting +3 attack, getting tightness just for his Ultralisk because he does have a few of them. But you don't even really need those upgrades, especially against a Protoss player. So right now, he is in a wonderful position. I'm going to speed this up just a little bit. I did want to get to where the Zerg does engage. And you can see this constant creep spread, this constant production of Swarm Host, Ultralisk, and Vipers. Vipers are very important because if the Protoss player does go for some form of Colossus play, or even Templars if you're really good with with your clicking accuracy, let's say, you can get those Templars and those Colossi. The Colossi, of course, being the more important ones. Even the Void Rays later on, if you need something to get out, you can hit them with your Hydras, because usually Hydras follow a Swarm Host play, or in this case you can just get them down with the Queens because he has so many Queens with this army, and that's nice because Ultralists are just naturally tanky and they will stay alive forever with that many Queens, and with the Locust behind them, they are going to do a lot of damage. So we see, this is the Protoss player, he is under siege right now, and that is solely because of this constantly reproducing army right here that is taking no resources. Right now, the Zerg is just banking resources, and that's going to allow him to make these Hydras here. He does have the Den on the way, and that's because while the Protoss player is going to be able to take care of these units repeatedly, he's also going to lose units in the process, and that means that his supply, or his money, is going to be spent on resupplying, while the Zerg money is just banking up and allowing him to tech up. This allows him to take any future engagements much more effectively, because maybe in this case he sees a lot of Stalkers and Immortals, and I don't know if he knows that those Colossi are hallucinated or not. Really, he could just mass one type of unit. He could just make a lot of Lings right now. He can use his larva and resources on anything he wants because they are just going to constantly build up. And in this case, he will make Hydras here momentarily. He does finally start his armor upgrades off of one Evo chamber because now he figures why not get them. But they aren't that important like a build like this. We see the Protoss player, though, he's going to be constantly taking damage. Again, sorry for my computer, I had everything else shut or turned off, so I don't know why it's going a little bit slower today. Either way, though, so the Protoss player can't engage on this, and that's another important part of Swarm Host. And for the Protoss player, you know, because I am a TOS player, if you are in this situation, maybe make this a little bit more of how to deal with Swarm Host, and I might actually make a video solely dedicated to that now that I think about it, is that you do not engage this. You do not. No. No. You have to take a Warp Prism or something. Look at the Zerg. Look at the Zerg's natural. Completely undefended. Look at his main. Completely undefended. Look at his third. Completely undefended. And even his fourth. there is no defense here because he can't afford it. Now he is going to start banking up resources, so the longer you let him take this kind of siege position, the easier it is for the Zerg, of course. But now he's just going to tear apart this front line because there's no area of effect damage. And once that there was area of effect damage, you can just use the Vipers, you can pull in those Colossi, you can pull in those Templar, and everything's going to die to your Hydras and Queens, or even if you just mass Spore Crawlers, because that is devastating to deal with as a Protoss player. So he's in a really tight spot right now. He's going to eventually have to lose this third base here, and he will eventually want to expand down here, but that's going to take so long. He loses this base completely for free. The Ultras don't need to be in here at all because the Swarm hosts are going to keep pressuring. They're going to get a few more kills repeatedly. There goes even a sentry. Almost. Yeah, there it goes. So there's more and more money being spent on nothing. The Protoss player can warp in more units, but a warp in here is just going to die off. It might delay the inevitable, but it's not going to win you the game. A warp in somewhere over here that comes into the side if the Zerg expanded back down here, or a warp prism drop right here with like 8 zealots warped in, that would do a lot of damage, that would kill off a base, and that would hinder the Swarm host play. But right now, yes, the Protoss player can deal with Ultras, but he can't deal with the Lotus that is just going to keep being massed, and they do not die even. They are just so, they have a lot of health for lasting this long and for being completely free units, especially 2 coming out at a time. But that's a debate for a different time. So the Protoss player does hold here ever so slightly, does have to does kill off the rest of the Ultras. I think 1 survives at the end of all this, sorry. But because of the Swarm host play, the Zerg's bank has just skyrocketed. He's had so much money. He just made 15 Hydras right off the bat, and he still has more money, and he's almost maxed out. The Protoss player has constantly thrown resources at these Swarm hosts, and that means that he has nothing banking up, and his supply is devastatingly low for this time in this kind of a matchup. So what is he going to do? He's going to go more for the Sky Toss, and a lot of people will do that. I highly suggest against it. You need to get the Colossi damage out, you need to get Storms out, and you need to be hitting from multiple angles. Go watch my other video on hitting from multiple angles. It's not with Swarm host play necessarily, but it has the same ideas. Because now this army is going to constantly push in here. It will kill the Nexus in about 2 or 3 more goes of Locust. Creep is everywhere because the Protosses let the Zerg get out of control. Once this kind of situation happens, there's really no room for the Protoss to win. He didn't drop anywhere. He didn't hit from any other angle. He tries to just constantly press into this, and the Locusts are going to do too much damage, just like they did at the beginning of the game, where 5 or 6 Swarm hosts were enough to defend an entire Robo Gateway all-in push. Now at this point, they are able to defend all of this Robo and Gateway as well as Void Rays because they deal so much damage and because they are constantly reinforcing. So keep all these things in mind. This game does go terribly for the Protoss player very soon. He does actually GG out, and then since I got this off GG Tracker, somebody else takes control of the Zerg army or something like that. Either way, you just need to know for Swarm host play. 1, they're good at any point in the game. I don't suggest straight rushing them. That's probably not a good idea, of course. But in the mid game, they can hold off against those really well-timed all-ins from Protoss, and in the later stages of the game, they constantly come out. So if you can defend them with Hydralisk and Queens or a tankier unit, like in this case Ultralisk, they are not going to die, and they are going to constantly be poking down that Protoss army. So this is how you use Swarm Host in this example. You can use them in many other ways, of course, but they are a very strong unit, and I would definitely like to see more of their play in the pro scene. Maybe not to the tanky extent that we do see in a lot of the more recent games, but something like this where they are constantly pushing and just being used everywhere, because like all Zerg units, they need to be being used. So that is the end of this video though. Tell me how I could have made it better, how I should orient the video to a certain audience or whatnot. I usually play Protoss, so I might have missed a few Zerg things, but I will work on that, and I will make another video based on how to deal with Swarm Host more in depth. Either way, give me that feedback, and thank you for watching.